But okay, this one's been a long time coming, and you guys know that. I've been trying to get to do the Mordred analysis here, but we had some other stuff kind of get in the way there, where again, I wanted to make sure that we had the Summer 5 review out ahead of things, because we don't know when the devs are going to drop that announcement on us. But taking a look at Mordred here, obviously Mordred just got a very recent buff that has really helped her out, and so we're going to do a full-blown analysis on her. I think for years, Mordred had always been that sort of go-to farmer, and I had talked about this actually when we went over the buff, that honestly, for a long period in time there, she was just that AoE Saber that everyone kind of wanted, because she was one of the only ones that had charge. And she was actually able to be kind of worked in with Waver and stuff like that, even in the pre-Merlin era, to be able to actually function. But typically, because we didn't have a whole lot of actual, like, crazy scaling, like, Buster buffs back in the day, you didn't necessarily have that much firepower with her, so you still kind of needed, in a lot of cases, a really high NP level of Mordred. Those days are gone. You do not need that anymore, and we're going to talk about that. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. Taking a look at Mordred, she's got 11.7k attack power. It's, again, a very solid number there. She's creeping up there on almost 12k, so nothing bad there. Still has pretty thick HP here at almost 15k, so definitely good there, especially with the consideration of her third skill in mind. So now looking at the rest here, she is earth traded. She has pretty normal star absorption and star generation for a Saber. And then again, you've got a 0.56 NP gain rate. This is maybe one of Mo's weakest parts, but don't worry about that, because again, with the way the Buster systems work now on JP, it's basically 3-turn or bust in a lot of ways. But you could still end up using Mo in some sort of challenge environment, and we'll address that as we get deeper in. She's got 3% NP charge defense. This is definitely the normal average amount. A 24.5 death rate, also pretty much average. And she is chaotic balanced. Again, balanced is a relatively rare one, so at least you have that, where that's going to kind of cut down on some of the exploitable things that enemies might be able to do against her. She is female gender, just don't tell her that to her face. She is an Artoria face, just don't tell her that to her face. She is costume owning, dragon, hominide servant, humanoid, riding, a round table knight, a normal servant, a 7-knight servant, and weak to Intima Elish. We're kind of getting a laundry list of traits now in some of these older units because of so many additional traits that we've seen added. Now, while she does have that 0.56 NP gain rate here, she does have a 3-hit arts card. So again, this is actually the new average. So even though she's a basic year 1 unit that comes to us with London, she ends up still kind of having a decently scaling arts card here, but she only has the 2. She has a 2-hit quick card, but remember, she will have riding, so that'll help kind of the performance issues there. And she only has a 1-hit buster, but she has 2 of them. So again, she can form a triple buster chain with her own NP. But still, we don't care too much about the hit counts on a buster card, because a lot of hit counts is dealing with overkill, overcharge, anything like that, and basically star gen and NP gen as a result. So extra hit counts don't really affect damage in that regard, and so it's one of those deals where you're more concerned with the other intangible aspects. Now, taking a look at her first skill here, and this is actually the one that just recently got the buff. It basically just used to be a 1-turn mana burst of 50% on a 5-turn cooldown. This is actually pretty similar to Artoria's. Nothing too crazy, just a strong base skill, and it had always been that way even back in the day. But now it gets upgraded to basically having 3 times 3 turns buster performance. And I had actually talked about this in the past, where people had come to me and said, like, hey, I think Mordred needs a second NP interlude CAD. Hey, I think she needs some sort of massive damage increase. And I said, no, they really don't need to do that. In fact, one of the only things that they would really need to do is make the buster performance 3 turns. Because of the way the Koyanskaya system works, you can basically now overlap a skill if it's got 6 turns or less cooldown very easily. And so that would have allowed her to essentially be able to pop it on turns 1 and 3. But because it's 5-turn, you can actually pop it on like turn 1 and then 2, or maybe even turn 2 and then turn 3. So it does help you out in that regard, where it allows you to have kind of some overlap. I'm going to say in Mordred's case, it really depends on whether or not you're going to be carding against some of the enemies, but typically popping the buffs earlier is better than popping them later, but it maybe depends on your situation. still, this allows her to double up. That would allow her to basically, without actually directly increasing her damage in the actual buster system that you'll probably be running her in. And so I said, hey, do that, and boom, there you go. That's 50% buster right there that she didn't have, and that would bring her a lot more in line. And that's basically what they did here. They did it exactly like I expected them to. On top of that, they end up adding the critical damage to buster cards for 3 turns. Another nice increase here of 30%. And this is actually really good with her second skill that we'll talk about in a minute because of how synergistic it is. But then on top of all of that, they still came in and gave her increase on attack for 3 turns by 20%. So again, basically this amounts to a really just nice upgrade for her skill. She ends up getting the ability to not only multi-stack the buster buff, but she gets a new 20% buff that can also be stacked. So just very, very strong upgrade here, and this absolutely propels her a lot further forward in terms of damage, which I'll talk about at the end as we go over the NP damage for her now. So now we get to the second skill, and this one's also had an upgrade. It originally started out as Instinct. It's one of the more basic skills that we've seen them kind of readdress now over time in the game. If you managed to have it at rank 10 back in the day, you'd get 14 stars all on a 5-turn cooldown. Not bad if you used it at the right time, but really just a very unimaginative, very boring type of skill. They end up upgrading it to Cigarette Lion, and that gives her critical star absorption of buster cards for 1 turn. So remember how your buster cards now crit harder because of the first skill? The upgrade to the second skill allows the buster cards to soak those stars for at least 1 turn. So really, really nice there. Then it also increased her critical damage 3 times 3 turns. That is 50%. And this can stack with the crit damage on the first skill there. So really, really nice. Now you basically have 80% crit damage right there. And that's assuming you didn't double up the first skill, which you could. So yeah, you might be looking at something like a nice, easy, just like crap, like 160% crit damage between these 2 skills if you double them both. So really, really strong in terms of crits. And I think that fits Mo very well for how she kind of is always just this firebrand, sort of rebellious teenager type of character. Now, again, she then gets still her critical stars, but they upgrade it. Instead of it being 14 stars, it's now 15. So really small upgrade there. The real, again, actual upgrades come to the other parts of this, but still really, really nice upgrade to the skill. And then we get to her third skill. And her third skill has honestly always been one of her strongest ones. Again, you guys can see it is a debuff cleanse, which I think a lot of people forget exists on this. And that's why when I saw some people saying like, oh, she needed like the Dragon Core treatment like Artoria, or they needed to give her a lot more damage, I was like, well, keep in mind she already has a lot more utility in a lot of ways, because she gets a defense increase as well of 50%. So remember how I talked about how her HP value is pretty good considering her third skill? Yeah, a 50% damage increase on a turn of your choosing, she can actually soak quite a bit of damage if you manage to line it up with an enemy's nuke phase. And then certainly here, it's also going to charge her gauge by 30%. And this is just, again, one of those early reasons for why a lot of people were using Mordred. All on a 6-turn cooldown here. Now, looking at, again, the rest of her kit here, basically, she's got passive skills. Again, these year 1 servants don't have too much in the way of passives. She has magic resistance B of 17.5% debuff resistance there, and then riding B for an additional quick performance of 8%. That's going to help those quick cards that are only 2 hit. And then again, looking at the append skills here, her extra attack finesse, again, this is just solid. You might want it on her. There's no extra reason to take this over any other unit in that regard. And then her mana loading, you're actually really going to want this. And the reason I explain is because she has that 30% charge. She can double up that 30% charge in a Koyanskaya system. And so essentially, the way to do it is if we work backwards, and the way a lot of Koyanskaya systems work here, we're going to say this is wave 1, this is wave 2, and this is wave 3. Now, essentially, if you have someone like Oberon, you know you have 70% charge on turn 3 when you need it most. Well, Mo's a 30% charger. So that means you have 30% charge on turns 1 and turns 3 here, allowing you to basically double it up because you're using double Koyanskaya as well. Well, if you've got double Koyanskaya, that means you have two 50% charge skills. So right there, you now have waves 2 and waves 3 handled. You have 100% charge on each of those waves. Turn 1, you had 30%. So why do you want the mana loading? Because the mana loading, if you max it, gives another 20% charge right here, and thus allows her to start from 50%. This actually can get even more crazy, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But again, yeah, you're going to want mana loading on her, because that's going to at least allow her to start from 50%, as if she were a 50% charger, even though she's only 30%. So I highly recommend that being the first thing you take. And ironically enough, her third append is not that bad, because it increases her own attack against Saber enemies. And you're going to see when we get to the NP, this is actually right in her wheelhouse. So looking at the Noble Phantasm, it started out just dealing damage to all enemies here, and then dealing extra damage with the overcharge effect to anyone that had the Arthur trait. So basically any Artoria, not just Saber face, but any Artoria type of enemy. So a lot of those Artorias, ironically enough, happen to be Sabers. And so that's where this third append actually kind of comes into play. You get a little bit of synergy there that she otherwise wouldn't have as a Saber herself normally. But interestingly enough, the scaling on this was weird. It was basically a super effective modifier of 180%, and then overcharge gave you NP charge after the damage went out of 10%. A lot of the Artorias have this, and again, Mordred gets it as well, but it wasn't that strong. So they end up coming back and giving her an NP interlude, which obviously is going to increase the amount of damage that she deals. Then also they increased the charge of the NP to 20% now. So that gives her that 20% refund on the back end of the NP. And why is that important? Well, let me punt on that for one quick second. Let's go over here and look at the NP damage list. You guys can see, and again, remember the NP damage list here is neutral numbers, and it uses everybody's own skills in consideration. It does not use support buffs or anything like that coming externally. So right here on the outset, it looks like Artoria is still trouncing Mordred here at 38.8k to 31.6. But this is a huge leap for Mordred. Mordred used to be basically down here in the realms of like, basically almost, I want to say like in the realms of like Muramasa and Arthur. So now the fact that Mordred has jumped all the way this far tells you just how far she has come. It is basically a like 8,000 raw damage upgrade just with that. Now consider throwing her into the Koyanskaya system. Consider allowing her to double up, and allow me to explain. Artoria will still beat her in damage outright if you have something like Cranking on. Cranking is a welfare CE that you guys are going to get next year here on NA from the Bunyan event. It is 50% starting charge, it is buster up, and it is NP damage. It is solid. It is actually even better than aerial drive if you're just trying to NP. So really, really good, and obviously because it has a little bit of extra NP damage, it's going to scale really nice with Oberon. So Artoria will still beat Mordred slightly, pound for pound, if we're using Cranking. The deal here is there is a craft essence out there that, allow me to show you here, is very, very, very strong, called Rising Mudrain. And if you've never seen this craft essence before, it basically is our new Black Grail that actually has overcharge on it. So it's our first CE in quite a long time that scales to 2400 attack. And then it also, even just at a single copy, would give you 40% more NP damage with overcharge of 2 stages 1 time. At MLB, if you manage to get it, again, it's a relatively new and rare 5-star CE that has been permanently added. So it's 50% NP damage. Not quite the 80% with Black Grail that you're used to, but all of that can be doubled up with Oberon. So really, really strong. And again, do not scoff at the 2400 attack power if you manage to get this thing to MLB. That is really solid scaling and more than, again, the vast majority of CEs in the game. So why do I mention this? Well, because this overcharge NP 2 stages 1 time is extremely significant for units like our Saber faces, particularly Artoria and Mordred. As we go back to look at this, remember that her overcharge gives charge after her NP goes off. So, if we overcharge it 2 more stages, now you're looking at 30%. Allow me to explain what this means. So, let's go back to our little table here as we were talking about. This is turn 1, this is turn 2, and this is turn 3, or wave 3 if you will, okay? Basically, you know you're going to get the 30% charge back over here. Now, normally, Mordred, again, we're going to be using double Koyan Sky in this setup, right? So basically, normally Mordred would be sitting here doing that, and basically starting out with the 30% and her mana loading there in the front end, and then using, again, Oberon in the final wave, and then having like a 50% charge sheet. With Rising Mudrain, we're starting at 0. And so how this one works is we're going to operate going forward, basically. So think about it this way. Instead, Mordred starts at 0, but she has her append. So that's 20% charge. She uses her charge skill. Now she's at 50%. The party, instead of having double Koyan Skya out, starts with 1 Koyan Skya and 1 Oberon out, with a Koyan Skya in the back line. So we're going to use one of the Koyan Skya's charge skills here on turn 1. So you've already gotten the cooldown reduction, so you needed to use Mordred's skills first. Doing that, you've got 100% charge. You've handled turn 1. Because of Rising Mudrain and those extra stacks there, you now refund 30% here. We're going to go ahead and use Oberon's 20% charge skill, his party-wide one, to bring her up to 50 now. We're going to have rotated for the other Koyan Skya. Okay? You can do that turn 1 if you please. And then basically, again, get her 50% in. That's another 100% charge. Now, you've lost the overcharge effect because it's a one-time only effect from Rising Mudrain, but she still gets 20% here. And you still get her 30% charge back. All you have left now out of all the charge skills is just Oberon's 50%. And that's all you need. Now you're at 100% for turn 3. You can 3-turn with Mordred starting from 0. That's why Rising Mudrain is important, is because it gives overcharge where she can use it most. It changes this 20% to a 30%, and that allows her to work with Oberon's 20%, to not have all of her 20% refund be wasted. Because essentially how it worked before is, I didn't really show it to you, but if we actually did the 1, 2, 3 system there again, you basically got to see where she started out with a 50% charge CE. She had 30% of her own charge, and she had mana loading. And that right there was your first turn. She actually refunded 20% on each of these waves. And the problem that you had is, even though you had the 30% here on wave 3 and Oberon 70% here, well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could have deferred and said this was a 50% and that you used Oberon's 20% here, but you still needed to use both Koyan Skya 50% charges in order to get the stuff back. So no matter how you did it, you're basically wasting 40% charge. Rising Mudrain gives you that extra 10%. That extra 10% changed that wasted 40% charge into an actualizable 50% charge, and allows you to start from 0. So it's a really, really strong thing. So again, something like cranking, Artoria's barely going to edge Mordred still. Something like Mudrain, Mordred's barely going to edge Artoria now. Really strong, but not everyone's necessarily going to have it. It is a rare gotcha CE in that regard, so maybe over time, over the years, you guys might manage to get MLB of it, but still, it's really, really strong, going to scale really well. So let that shape your opinion on Mordred. Mordred is now fantastic. She's going to be excellent at 3-turning, excellent at being able to farm, and still not that bad of a challenge unit with all that crit power, with that self-cleanse, with that defense up. So again, I think she's well worth your attention now at this point in time. So let me know what you guys think about Mordred now and whether or not you'll be rolling for her in the future. and I'll be sure to read those comments below. See you guys for the next one, and have a good one.